right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing what we started out with yesterday. Of course, yesterday we went in lots of details in regards to the ayat on this page. We're looking at ذَلِكُمُ اللَّهُ رَبُّكُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ فَاعْبُدُوهُ وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَكِيلٌ. We kind of did an overview interpretation, at least the ideas, the themes, the concepts that are in there. We didn't really do a thorough interpretation, so that's one thing that we'll be doing, inshallah. And we also did this page as well, so we pretty much got into explaining the theme in the ayat. And we said the main theme is one, returning us to Tawheed. The second theme is basically, let's call it grounding us with Tawheed. Grounding us with Tawheed, what does that look like? And what are the different influences, and the different influences that may act as an impact and have their influences to, one, enhancing our tawheed, or two, probably contaminating our minds or our hearts, our fu'ad, or our idrak, our comprehension. And we talked about the eyes, we talked about the ears and the listening, and we correlated between the ears and what they hear with what the heart basically cooks. That's the word that we use. We use the word cook because of the word fu'ad, which basically comes from the root fa'ada, which means to cook, but it also means the heart. But the whole idea of heart, there's the qalb, and there's the fu'ad, and there's the there's the lub as well. So it depends on the meaning, and therefore we can see that the ayat are looking at the same exact organ, the same exact area, but looking at it from different areas, which gives us an indication that there are multiple ways in how one gland or one side of the body may function. So think of it as the same way when you would look at the brain. You've got the frontal lobe, the different areas within the brain, whether it's a side or whether it's the left, etc. And each and every single one basically acts as responsible. One is for thought, one is for coordination, one is for names, one is for moving different things. The rest goes on and on. And that's the same thing. Even when you see the Quran, it can indicate specific areas and not necessarily just the general thing. For example, it will say this is within the fu'ad, a specific area, a specific area that processes certain things. Sometimes it can talk about it from al-qalb. Same thing when you look at the ayah, ناصية كاذبة خاطئة. It made it really clear, ناصية, and the ناصية is basically in the front area. كاذبة, it is a lying nasia, a lying frontal lobe. It was specifying which part of the head and which part of the brain was responsible for the lies that they had simply made. Okay, so you could see that the ayat may sometimes specify and sometimes would give a general statement. So then, of course, اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك وأعرض عن المشركين. And then, of course, we're going to go in details, inshallah, with the meanings and the stories of each and every single one. So let's do that right now. وَكَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِيَقُولُوا دَرَسْتَ وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. Let's look at this one. So وَكَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ, we're basically right there, okay? I try to give you the actual page for you to see, and not necessarily, these writings right there, because I know many and all of us, we just need to kind of highlighted on the Quran that we could actually see and locate it on that page. What does that mean? وَكَذَلِكَ. وَكَذَلِكَ basically means that that's indicating that there's a certain pattern, that there's nothing that happens just out of the blue, but there is a relationship between whether it's the choices that we make or how basically things would function, or whether there's a relationship between the will, whether it is our will or whether it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. Let me just emphasize on one thing. When we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, what does that look like? Does that look like something that we may desire? Not necessarily. Because when you say Allah's will, it can include within that word speaking about qadar. Okay, what does that mean? So when you speak about qadar, you speak about will, it basically means the paradigm, it means the pattern, it means the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world to function in. Keep that in mind. Created the world to function in. So what does that mean? That basically means that there are certain things, let's say, when you look at your appearance. Okay, let's say, I look like a person with these color eyes, this color skin, this type of shape in the head, etc., this type of body shape, etc., all these different things. Those are some of the details of what your DNA contained. What your DNA contained is basically a written blueprint of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed, meaning structured within nature, whether we're speaking about your DNA or whether we're speaking about nature outside, or whether we're speaking about the details of how things in matter, how they would be created in, or whether we're speaking about motion. So what does it mean, motion? That there are certain wills, certain patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, not only in matter, but also how this relates to a number of different, let's say, forces within the world. For example, your will, you decided to make the will to, I don't know, give a sadaqah. This sadaqah, the Prophet ﷺ said, "As-sadaqah tutfi'u ghadab al-Rabb." As-sadaqah, or you want to remove a niqam, basically bil-luqam. You want to remove perhaps maybe a calamity that you're going through. You would want to donate. You got a sick child, go and donate. You have probably, maybe you, I don't know, your house burnt down. Maybe you want to give a sadaqah. This sadaqah takes away a number of different, let's call it, forces. Perhaps it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala angry at you, or which basically it's demonstrated in the motion that you would see around you. Maybe an illness, maybe fire, maybe, I don't know, car breaking down, whatever it is. All these different things, they may act as the motion that simply reads, or that simply translates what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed. So yes, we will say, let's say a car crashes, we will say qadarullah, but what we mean by qadarullah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will / in motion, in making certain motions and making certain things happen, is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Same thing if we speak about not only negative, but also positive. That's why it is part of the pillars of faith that we would say al-iman bil-qadarihi khayrihi wa sharrih. Look at the word بخيره خيره وشره. We would say الإيمان بالقدر, faith in al-qadar, in the good and the bad of it. What does that mean? That means whether things go the right direction or whether things go the wrong direction. What we mean by wrong direction as not to what we desire. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not whatsoever will absolute evil. Keep that one in mind. That's why it is part of the adab that we would say, وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ. وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ. We would not attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as in honor for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we would still believe that He does have the power to control how things would function. Part of the will, keep that one in mind. Part of the will is how things would go in a certain pattern. Just like we talked about, well, you are, let's say, Indian, you're married to an Indian guy, don't expect your children to look Russian. Your children are going to look Indian, right? If you are a different race, or let's say Russian, married to a Russian, let's say, the typical, let's say, I know Russia has different races, but we're just going to, assume the Vladimir Putin's race, I guess. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. And then they're not going to get an African child. Okay. But here's one thing. When you talk about the blueprints, your DNA, and what that generates, that's also let us know that there is a pattern that was created, whether we're speaking about matter or whether we're speaking about the different, let's call it design. So when you do something good, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know that this good will also generate something good in your future. You do something wrong, you may not see the implication, the impact of the wrong thing that you had done now, but it may happen in many years to come without you knowing that it was an evil deed or a good deed that you had done, and then therefore you had seen its power / the power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within this world. He created this world to function based on you put in a good investment that's going to bring in a good outcome. You put an evil investment that's basically going to generate an evil thing, even though it doesn't have to be immediate. It can be postponed to a certain time, and then therefore we would see the word كذلك. كذلك is to let us know that this pattern is not only in matter, but it is also in motion, and therefore كذلك نصرف الآيات. When you look at the word نصرف, نصرف means number one, it comes from the root sa, ra, fa. The word sa, ra, fa, let's write that down, okay? We're going to write that word down right there, sa, ra, and fa. When you look at the word sarafa, the word sarafa has multiple meanings. The word sarafa can mean to dispense. The word sarafa can mean to direct. The word sarafa could also mean to channel. If you are giving a direction, you're dispensing, you can also channel that. Okay, so therefore you put in dispense, you put in direct, and therefore channel things. So it can also mean to, one, if you're directing something, or you're using a certain channel, or you're using a way to dispense something, and that is depending on what exactly are you using this, let's say, process for. So this would be a process. What are you processing, whether in channeling, or whether in giving direction, or whether in dispensing? So that's where that other noun that clarifies what is being dispensed, what is being channeled, what is being directed, to actually say we're speaking about al-ayat. We're speaking about the different miracles, the different verses, the different evidences that were sent, that they are what? That they were basically one to give direction. In other words, they were detailed enough to give direction, to channel you towards a certain path, to basically dispense different ideas. Let me look at this one for a bit. Because when you say it was supposed to channel, if you're going to say that al-ayat, whether you mean al-ayat, whether you use the al to mean al-ahdiyya, remember there are two kinds of al. Remember that, okay? Two kinds of al. We said that there's an al-ahdiyya, which basically means a specifying al, or there is the other al, which basically means it is al, and that one is basically called, hold on, let me just get that one right there. Al, and that one is called al-istighraqiyya. Al-istighraqiyya. And that would be an inclusive al. Okay, when you say inclusive and you say specifying, what are you talking about? So when you say al-ayat, it can be specifying, in other words, telling me it's talking about a specific ayah to basically mean al-Quran. Or it can be inclusive ayah. The word ayah basically means miracle, basically means sign. So if we say specifying sign / miracle, within this context, it can mean that it's talking about the Quran. It can actually be there. Why? Because anyways, it said قَدْ جَاءَكُمْ بَصَائِرُ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, and plus basically telling us all the different things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it can be an inclusive al to also mean other signs, whether we're speaking about the signs in the universe or whether we're speaking about the signs that prove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the different signs that tell you that there's an ending to life, meaning there's a purpose. If you say that there's an ending, that basically means there's a beginning. If you say that there's a beginning, that should mean by having a beginning and an ending, that in between, that there's a purpose, that let this design basically happen. A design just doesn't happen out of the blue. If it is an intricate design, detailed design, it basically would reflect an intention that preceded the creation. What does that mean? So we're speaking about an intention, meaning a purpose that preceded, that happened before the creation. So let's give an example. You don't just make something and decide, it's going to turn out as a cake. No, you intended that you're going to make it a cake, and therefore you would use the ingredients to basically suit a cake. And that's the same thing when we're talking about your eyes. They were designed in a way to basically give a certain purpose, which is seeing. Your ears were designed in a certain way to serve the purpose of hearing. Then, therefore, if we're speaking about example 1, seeing, hearing, your heart, your kidneys, your liver, each and every single one was designed in a certain way to serve a certain purpose, then therefore everything about life basically does and can, within that pattern, basically prove that there was a purpose that preceded the existence. The purpose that preceded the existence, basically, that is what this ayah would also give us the indication that نصرف الآيات, that the different the different ayat, whether we're speaking about the open book, the world, the nature, everything around you that you see, or whether we're speaking about the written book, the Quran. Okay, so if we say نصرف الآية to mean inclusive, open book, nature, that is, or written book, al-Quran, so that would also be a tafsir right there, which the ayat would include. And therefore, that those ayat, the open book and the written book, were basically made to help give you direction, to help give you a channeling towards a certain direction. And number 3, those ayat were to dispense basically and provoke certain ideas in your mind to help you basically find the right path. Okay, so that's, it's a lot to say. That's why I delayed it for today. وَلِيَقُولُوا دَرَسْتَ. Now, there are 2 different qira'at for the word وَلِيَقُولُوا. The first one was wali with a kasra on the lam right there, and the other qira'ah was with a sukoon, وَلْيَقُولُوا. What's the difference? When you say وَلِيَقُولُوا, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is giving me, let's say, an intention, but it can mean that this might be an outcome. Okay? This is an expected outcome, or one of the outcomes that we would know that they might bring in a narrative like that. And that narrative that it is referring to is that there was going to be a claim that the Prophet ﷺ had plagiarized the Quran from previous scriptures, okay? Or probably taken the time to set all of this and set up these ayat together. In other words, there was a team of maybe experts in poetry, a team of experts in history, a team of experts in the different fields, and then therefore basically gave this work and this masterpiece and given it to him to basically present it as if it was from God. Okay, so that was the claim. But the other qira'ah, when it says وَلِيَقُولُوا, is this supposed to give us an indication that, yes, this may be an expectation that they might actually make up as a claim? And in the word وَلْيَقُولُوا with a sukoon and not with a kasra is basically a form of making a warning or a threat to those that would claim that the Quran was plagiarized from previous scriptures. So whether we're speaking about وَلِيَقُولُوا or وَلْيَقُولُوا, at the end, it simply is scolding and reprimanding those that would make such a claim with definitely no evidence, for this is exclusive by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring about a direction, to bring about a channel, to bring about basically a revelation to help people basically find the way. وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. And it is basically, when you look at وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ, so yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that they would make up the claim that it was plagiarized, but he said, well, وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ. But in the end, even if they would make any claim, it doesn't matter about what claims they would bring up. At the end, you basically have one duty, and that is to bring about the clarification for those that would know. Here's one thing. Why did it say وَلَنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ? If they know, then why did they need to know if they already know? No, that's not what it's saying. Itibyan, let's write that word down, okay? Itibyan is different. So let's write that down. Itibyan, or the root is bana. What does that mean? The word bana means to bring about clarity. So, for example, for sure you know the theme behind all these ayat. In general, you know all the theme. You're like, yeah, well, I know it's basically telling me to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be committed, all of that. So yeah, nothing new. I know all that piece. But what you seek is tibyan. Tibyan would be an adjective. In other words, you seek the word bana to bring about the clarity and even go deeper and deeper than a surfaced meaning. So you already know the truth. You already know that this is basically a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're not going to say that it's plagiarized. So then why should I continue reading? Well, that's in order to give you the clarification to help you find the channeling, the direction, and certainly how you would dispense and process the ideas in a vision, two, in an implementation / behavior, and three, how that would all together create an identity for you. How do we create that identity? That's why it said, okay, you wanted to talk about the channeling of the ideas. I told you it's in the ayat, open book and written book. Number two, you wanted to talk about how you would make that as an identity. Here we go. اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك. That's how you would channel it. Here goes that word. That's how you would channel it. That's how you would find the direction through ما أوحي إليك, what was written in that revelation. So when you look at al-ayat, the opinion that basically said it was specifying they said, well, here's our evidence. It's basically talking about اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك, so it can tell us that al-ayat, here's a clarification of what ayah I'm talking about. I'm talking about what was revealed unto you from your Lord Almighty. But certainly the Quran in itself is always referring you to the open book / the universe / things in nature, for you to see the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically in creation. Okay, let's go back to right there in Tafseer al-Qurtubi. وَقِيلَ وَلْيَقُولُوا دَرَسْتَ. So that's when he said, لَامُ الصَّيْرُورَةِ. What does that mean? So are we talking about that wali or wal yaqulu? And that's why we said that the lam wali is basically telling us a possible chronology. When you look at the word sayrura, that means a chronology that was a possible thing that they would say, but that should not let you take the step back and decide to not, because you were afraid of the accusation. Keep that one in mind. Keep this one in mind, because this is very common, that people want to take a right act or a right move, but many times they're afraid of how people will interpret their intention or interpret what they do. This is extremely important. You know, you would see many would want to present a good thing, but they're always afraid of what people might interpret that into, and etc. And they're afraid of basically having their honor by the large number of people basically distorting their image, that they're afraid that the reality of who they are might actually be misunderstood. And they're afraid to really reveal their identity, or let's say their hijab, or their political views, or their Islam, or whatever it is. They're afraid. Just keep that one in mind. They're afraid to stand up perhaps in, let's say, an American university. They're afraid to stand up and show their solidarity, for example, for Palestine, or probably afraid to stand up and say that they have a completely different view, different understanding than the liberal view of liberal views of family structure and female male and all of that stuff. But then if it's a Muslim, at the end, you should not be afraid. Don't be afraid of what others might say that will not distort the truth. The truth will never be distorted. Okay? The truth is the truth. But their distortion, they will be responsible for it. You stand strong and firm, even when you might be aware that there is a high possibility that others will paintbrush and certainly distort your intention, or probably say evil things about your intention and why you wanted to do this, etc. Do what's right, even when some might actually come in to somehow, whether it is with fear, or whether it is because of an agenda, or whether what is motivating them, to basically present those views is basically because of culture, because of their own identity. Don't let their identity be stronger than your commitment to your Muslim identity. You stand strong. You stand firm to your Muslim identity. If they are, with this type of enthusiasm, defending kufr, why did you lose your enthusiasm when you were defending truth? Stand strong, firm, and determined. Number two, when they basically had that, let's say, that power, that agenda, etc., to basically go in detail. Why are we as Muslims, when it comes to defending truth, we all of a sudden lose the logic and lose the ideas to support Islam? The ideas are basically, within Islam, are basically coherent. Their ideas contain discrepancies, contain contradictions, contain many flaws. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know, I want you to expose these discrepancies. I want you to expose those flaws and be sure that they are there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِيَقُولُوا دَرَسْتُ. We know that they're going to say that, but that doesn't mean we would step back or hesitate to say the truth. So at the end, وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ. And this is to tell us what? لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. That one key thing to keep you determined, to keep you strong in your identity, is basically seeking tibyan, and seeking ilm. That's to help you stay strong in your identity. And that's why he said, وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. Okay, so when you look at la sayrura, basically the lamb that shows a certain chronology, or whether an expected outcome, that does not necessarily mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted this to happen. This is not the sabab. So the revelation itself was not the reason. So this isn't supposed to be, let's say, a normal consequence. This isn't supposed to be a normal thing, but this was expected of them to claim, because the same thing happened to other prophets and messengers. Different accusations were thrown left and right. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you're not any different. The people are not any different. They're going to come with these different ways to not submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and throw it at you. So expect that and be firm in following what was revealed unto you. How? Well, we're going to give you some clarification slash ilm in order to keep you firm on the identity and what you present. Okay, let's see. The word nusarrif. Al-Qurtubi was basically giving us some details, and he said, well, we give one ayah after another in order to bring about the clarity. So therefore, they will definitely claim that you somehow had learned it elsewhere, but the truth of the matter, you learned it from your Lord Almighty. Now, this one's quite interesting. And he basically said, وَفِي دَرَسَتْ سَبْعُ قِرَاءَات. So there are 7 variant qira'at in this one. I'm not actually going to go in details with this one, so I'll just leave it at that. Darasat and darasta, and let's see, darasat. So I'll just skip this piece of it, okay? And who are they referring to that when they said that he was plagiarizing the Quran from elsewhere? They were referring it to the Yahud, that the Jews were the ones that taught the Prophet ﷺ, this Quran, and simply that was what the mushrikeen themselves had claimed. Did the Christians and the Jews actually claim that the Prophet ﷺ plagiarized it from the Christians and the Jews? The answer is no. That did not happen until later years, I would say in modern times in Orientalism. But during that time, they did not claim that it was coming from the Jews and the Christians. But there was an accusation that the Jews had given in terms of the Qibla. Said, well, you're facing the Qibla to Bayt al-Maqdis, just like us. Bayt al-Maqdis basically is Palestine, basically Al-Quds, basically Jerusalem. Okay, so like us, you're trying to plagiarize us. You're trying to copy us. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ قِبَلَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that ayah. Okay, at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ was always ordering us, when the Jews and the Christians would do a certain culture, a certain behavior, you as a Muslim do not plagiarize the Yahud and the Christians, or even any other religious group. So whether we're speaking about Hindus, we're speaking about shamans, whatever that religious group is, you do not replicate and you do not follow their identity or their way of doing things, unless this is dunya. What do we mean by dunya? There's a difference between dunya and akhirah, or dunya and deen. Yes. So for, let's say, you basically in our modern times, they use couches, they use chairs, they use tables, cars, etc. This is dunya. This is not related to akhirah. So you don't have to sit on ground. You don't have to sit on mattresses to say, oh, we're Muslim. No, you can sit on couches. Replicating the kuffar and things that are irrelevant to faith is permissible. Irrelevant to faith is permissible. Using a car and not using perhaps a camel, or using a spoon and not necessarily your hand. That's not necessarily faith. You don't have to eat with your hands. You can use a spoon if you would like. Okay, some people find it more delicious to eat with their hands. Well, that's okay. All right, but you don't have to. It doesn't make it a kafir style to eat with a spoon. Okay, same thing if we're talking about perhaps maybe using microphones, or perhaps using certain medications for treatment. You don't have to use ruqya as your way, and consider that using, augmentin, or antibiotics or whatever it is, that's a kafir way, that a Muslim way would basically use the ruqya and read the Quran, etc. That's absolutely false. If things are not related to deen, meaning it's part of different things that would make life easier, okay, and there's nothing that forbids it in Islam, then in that situation, you can use it even if the kuffar are the ones to being known for using it. Okay, even if that's the case. Same thing if we're talking about garments and clothes. Okay, is it permissible to wear a kafir style clothes? Okay, what does that look like? Let's say a tuxedo. Okay, you're wearing, well, that was basically known within that culture, even though some are claiming that the tuxedo and the idea of tuxedo and all of the vest and the pants and all of that, that was actually coming from Bilad Sham. I don't know how true that is, but that it was Syrian clothes, that it was Bilad Sham, Syrian to mean basically Palestine, to mean Lebanon, to mean Jordan, that's where it was coming from. I don't know if that is true, that because, of course, the claim was saying that that the garment that the West at the time was wearing was more of like a skirt, so kind of like the Irish and the Scottish and what they would wear. So that's basically what they used to wear, and that the idea of tuxedo, the idea of pants, etc., that it was coming from Bilad Sham, possibly. But let's just, regardless of this idea that it's coming from Bilad Sham, is this true? Is this not true? That's not what I want to discuss right now. Let's just assume that there is a garment, that there is a garment that is basically, let's say, easier to wear, and it's mainly worn by, let's say, Americans. Okay, mainly worn by an American. Okay, is it permissible? Let's talk about those kind of jeans that cowboys wear. Okay, are we allowed to wear that? We're
Or,
allowed to wear
or
that.
like the white dress, like the wedding dress.
Well, that's a good one. That's probably a better one. The white wedding dress. Are we allowed to wear the white wedding dress, okay, for our weddings? This is not religion. You can wear a white wedding dress, even though it is practiced by, let's say, the Western culture, that they had viewed white wedding dress as a way to celebrate a bride or a woman when she's getting married, etc. Is this permissible? It's permissible. But we're replicating the kuffar. If it's not relevant to faith, then it would be permissible. When would it be haram? If, let's say, that this garment represented a religious practice, okay, that's when it would be haram. Let's say that this religious practice, they would have a rope to basically present their relationship with catechism, being Catholic, okay, then that's a different story. Or probably having a certain cross with it, then that's a different story. That piece would be haram. Okay, but if it is not related to faith, it would not be haram to wear. Evidence, please. Certainly. The Prophet ﷺ had worn an inbijaniyah. The Prophet ﷺ had worn garments that were coming from Persia, garments that were coming from Yemen, garments that were coming from Egypt, and certainly those countries were not Muslim yet. Okay, those countries were not Muslim yet, but the Prophet ﷺ had worn it, despite the fact that it was coming from a kafir style, a kafir tradition. So think of me, for example, maybe, I don't know, wearing a garment or clothes, probably maybe Somali, that's not a religious garment, that's a traditional garment. Or perhaps maybe, maybe certain areas of India or certain areas of Russia, etc. That's more of a cultural dress and not necessarily a religious dress. If it's a religious dress, then that would be haram to wear and replicate, because that would be contradicting your identity as a Muslim. Okay, just keep that one in mind. All right. So, like we said, in general, to follow certain identity. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ مَاذَا أَنزَلَ رَبُّكُمْ قَالُوا أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. If they were told, where does what did your Lord Almighty reveal, they would be ready to basically throw right there all those different accusations, whether claimed that it was coming from previous and old legends, or whether that they had claimed that it was tumla alayhi bukratan wa asila, that there's somebody teaching him out there, and probably in those mountains someone's teaching him, etc. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to that one and said, well, wait a minute, the person that you're referring to is basically is not Muslim, is not Arabi, sorry, and therefore the ayah said, well, the tongue of the one they refer to is foreign, yet this is a clear Arabic speech. لسان الذي يلحدون إليه أعجمي وهذا لسان عربي مبين. How can you claim that this was somehow taught by this foreign person? Why foreign? Why speak about a foreign guy? I mean, why not Arabic? Because at the time, the Christians were only residing in parts of Syria, and they did not speak Arabic. They actually spoke Syriac and Aramaic. The Jews, their religious scriptures were written in Hebrew and Aramaic. Okay, so therefore, when you look at the Quran, it's 100% classical Arabic. Does not necessarily use or even have access to any of those scriptures in order to plagiarize it from them, or even have access to these people. These people were living anyways far away. And certainly, just because there are certain similarities in some laws, whether we're talking about dietary rules or whether we're speaking about fasting, that they had claimed that that proves that there was some form of borrowing, some form of plagiarism. But then the Quran basically states that the Quran is muhayminan alayh. That the Quran basically came in muhayminan alayh, meaning it even goes beyond, and the details in the Quran are far beyond than what you would find in the Jewish and even Christian scriptures. So just keeping that one in mind, let's see, just other notes that I actually wanted to mention right there. The other thing is that when you look at the scriptures that the Jews and the Christians had, they actually had rewritten, just keep that one in mind, they had rewritten a lot of their scripture, and therefore a lot of that rewriting basically that happened, it was basically coming from their own ideas, coming from their own shayateen inspiring them to that. But at the same time, you would say the Quran responding to that and basically telling them that, well, they were inspiring it in exposing what they were basically, what they were altering and what they were editing in their own scriptures. Just like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed the punishment of zina and adultery, not fornication, but adultery. And they had claimed, well, the punishment is we would put dark and black dye on their faces. Anybody that doesn't have detailed information would basically say, well, okay, all right, if that's what you say, I'm going to say the same thing. But the Prophet ﷺ basically exposed them right on the spot. It wasn't days later. Exposed them right on the spot, and the ayat basically were revealed that they had basically covered the truth in those verses, and that it was actually saying that stoning was the punishment for adultery. So that's when the Quran basically comes in to say, well, produce a surah like it. If you say that you've got the resources, go ahead, use those resources that you claim and produce a surah like it. So the whole thing basically tells us that the Quran proves itself an independent revelation, miraculous in confirming, basically in correcting a past scripture, and that it is uh, beyond human ability to basically make a Quran like it. Okay, so when you look at these ayat, let's go back to let's see right there, darastana. So you've got different qira'at right there. I'm going to skip the qira'at piece of it because they go in lots of details, but I want to get to this one. حكى أبو العباس, it's أبو العباس القرطبي, أنه قرئ وليقولوا درست بإسكان اللام على الأمر. So وليقولوا and not وليقولوا. Okay. And he said وفيه معنى التهديد. He said in using the قراءة وليقولوا with a sukoon, that it contains a way of reprimandment, a way of threat, and therefore basically the inference is, let them say whatever they would like, for the truth is all clear. As exactly the same idea. فَلْيَضْحَكُوا. Notice that it used فَلْيَضْحَكُوا. It didn't say just يضحكوا, but no, it said فَلْيَضْحَكوا. This lam right there is a lam to say, you know what, go ahead and laugh. Don't worry. وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا. Don't worry, you can laugh right now. You laugh as much as you want. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them the order to laugh, but he's basically saying, go ahead and laugh. We'll see who laughs at the end. That's basically a threat. As for the lam وَلِيَقُولُوا, that would be kay, for basically that sayrura that we talked about. And he said, وَهَذِهِ الْقِرَاءَةُ كُلُّهَا يَرْجِعُ اشْتِقَاقُهَا إِلَى شَيْءٍ واحد, إِلَى التَّلْيِينِ وَالتَّذْلِيلِ. That's a key one. That's why I basically put that blue well, it's not a وهذه القراءات. He said, and all these variant recitations would all go back to the same al-ishtiqaq, meaning conjugation, to one conjugation, basically to represent and certainly indicate التليين, to show a certain way of basically making the person not feel surprised by this outcome that might provoke them to say, or what this accusation might actually bring in. Don't be afraid. We are aware of this accusation. So sometimes when you would prepare the person beforehand about a possible outcome, it basically gives them the strength to basically pre-warned, is pre-cautioned. So that's the same thing when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us about the signs of Judgment Day. The signs of Judgment Day were there for a couple reasons why he told you some details. Number one is to know that Muhammad ibn Abdullah is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one main reason. For you to say more and more evidence that this wasn't some data that he basically had seen, and therefore saying, well, here's my expectations on what will happen. No, this isn't a specific data, because there was no data to build on, to somehow make an expectation. But that the Prophet ﷺ was given the data as a revelation for us to read and see through the signs of Judgment Day, the evidence of the prophethood for Muhammad ibn Abdullah ﷺ. The second reason is pre-warned, is pre-cautioned. It's to empower you to expect these fitan and not to fall in them. You know that there's going to come a time where there's going to be a gold rush, in Iraq or possibly Syria or possibly even in parts of Turkey. There's going to be a gold rush where they're going to start finding gold, for example, in that area in the near the Euphrates River. So therefore, do not get into that mess. Do not rush into this gold rush thinking that you would be basically amongst those that would be making it to being a millionaire or whatever it is. Do not be a part of that. So why was it telling? Well, it's a fitna. Why was the Prophet ﷺ telling us about a possibility, or at least not a possibility, but about the about what would happen in the future, about girls basically wearing tight clothes, revealing all their body. It's basically to tell us, listen, they're going to be inventing these types of materials that would be worn and it would shape the girls' bodies in all its detail. Why would he even tell us about that? He would tell us about that because it was to pre-warn the Muslim women, to tell them, listen, don't get attracted to this type of garment. Beware and be careful from being amongst those types of women. So that's basically pre-warning in order to pre-caution us. But here's the thing. What does the word darasa actually mean?
That is
The word, go ahead, dear. Somebody wants to say something. Okay. What does the word darasa mean? The word darasa has a couple meanings. Number one, the word, let me write that down actually, right? So that way we can see it. The word here we go, darasa. Okay. The word darasa can mean to step over something. Step over something? Wait a minute. I thought darasa means to learn something. Well, wait a minute. Yes, we're going to get there. The word darasa could also mean to grind and to crush. And darasa could also mean to learn. What is the relationship between learning, grinding, stepping over something? When you do that dirasa, when you study something, you go over the words. You grind the ideas, that you grind the information in your brain, and it becomes what you learn. Keep this one in mind, because just by attending, let's say, the classes, you would not be in a state of dirasa until you go over it again and again and again, and you let that basically get grinded in your brain. That's what dirasa is. Okay, till it really grinds in your brain. Think of it as getting cooked in your brain. That's what dirasa is. So when you look at darasa ta'am, that means to grind the food. That means to basically just completely step on it or completely pound it or etc. And certainly just for us to really see that. Now here's one thing. He said, Summiya Idris, he was named Idris because he was studious. Actually, the word Idris, he was not a Arab. Okay, so sometimes you might see in the books of tafsir an exaggeration about certain words and trying to Arabize and probably make it easy, but the word Idris is not even Arabic. Okay, Idris. Is it relating to, because in basically the Old Testament, he's Enoch. I know it kind of sounds weird, Enoch, or Echnuch. That's his name. Echnuch. You look at Echnuch. Why in English Enoch? Because they can't say the letter Cha. Echnuch. In Hebrew, Echnuch. Aramaic, Echnuch. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not say Echnuch and say Idris? Now, here's one thing. Just keep in mind that sometimes the names in the Quran may be Arabized, and sometimes the names don't necessarily, let's say, bring about the actual name, but sometimes a description, just like Fir'aun. Fir'aun, that's not his name. Okay? Whether it was Tutankhamun or whatever the name was, the Fir'aun was a position, was a position in this monarchy and all of that. Basically, that was a position. Okay? Same thing if we're talking about, perhaps, we're talking about al-Malik. Was that al-Aziz? Was that his name? Or was that a description that the Quran had given him, that he was al-Aziz, maybe self-efficient, a person that is independent, etc.? That's also a tafsir. So when you look at Idris, was that his actual name? Or was that similar to the description Al-Aziz, that was describing that particular prophet? Maybe his name is Akhnouch, but describing him that he was Idris, that he was a studious person. So when you look at the word Idris, was that he was a studious person? Was he studious to mean studying the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What really, why was his name Idris? We don't really have detailed information in that regards, but I'm just bringing it up because in some of the books of tafsir, they may even, speak about that. So I would like to, I guess, give somewhat of an overview how we understand and how we would read this information that we would find in the books of tafsir. So kind of like teaching how to learn. tafsir. Okay, وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ. What is it, tibyan? القول والتصريف. What is القول والتصريف? So when you look at وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ, al-Qurtubi wanted to say, sir, you said the word bana to basically mean to give clarity. I would like to give you a further detail. القول والتصريف. Okay, why did you say at-tasrif? He said because it was talking about nusarrifu here. What did we say, tasrif or sarafa mean? We said sarafa means to give direction. Sarafa means to channel. Sarafa means to process or dispense. So he said, وَلِنُبَيِّنَهُ is to basically give the details of how these were channeled, dispensed, given basically the information to give direction. And what is that for? Is that speaking about itibyan in the Quran to basically give clarity in order for people to basically learn more and be better aware and acquainted. So the sister in the chat is asking a question. Is eating with the right hand a sunnah? Yes, eating with the right hand is a sunnah, but eating with a spoon with the right hand is also sunnah. Okay, so you don't have to eat directly without a spoon. That's your choice. You would like to eat with your hand and not use a spoon, that's fine. But can I use a spoon with my right hand and basically eat that way? That's basically, let's see, here the sister is saying we have 5 categories: fard, sunnah, makruh, wajib, haram, etc. Well, that's based on okay, if we use a spoon while eating, it's mubah, but if we eat with our right hand having the intention, that is sunnah. Would it be sunnah? Okay, let me clarify something. When you look at sunnah, there are different definitions to sunnah. Okay, bear with me. When you look at sunnah to mean that it was recommended as a religious recommendation, okay, then certainly you look at, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he basically لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة. Basically telling us, well, I would have actually wanted to make it something as recommended and even give it a higher level of obligation and mandate it for you to do siwak before each and every single salah. But I didn't want to make it these religious obligations too hard on you because you might have basically your different circumstances. But there are certain sunan that the Prophet ﷺ had done himself, and this is not speaking about an exclusive thing, but the Prophet ﷺ had done himself as a personal preference. Okay? Now, this personal preference, okay, it would be a sunnah to mean a practice that he had done, but not necessarily something that he necessarily recommended for others to do. Let's give an example. The Prophet ﷺ, when the Sahaba wanted to eat that dab, that lizard, the desert lizard, the Sahaba themselves, they made it into a barbecue and were giving him the dab, but the Prophet ﷺ had excused himself and he said, "Lam ajidhu fi qawmi." I didn't find my people eating it, therefore he didn't want to say he was disgusted, but he just wanted to say, I'm not used to this type of food, but you can eat. You're okay with eating dab, you like it, I'm not used to it. Not my personal preference. The other Sahaba had eaten from that dab. Was it haram? No. Was it the sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ had basically not eaten from it? Well, it was his personal preference, but he made it clear that they can still eat it even though it wasn't his personal preference. Let's go farther. Certain things are irrelevant to deen, are irrelevant to religion. Let's give an example. The Prophet ﷺ had seen the Sahaba in Medina. Remember, Mecca was not a fertile land, so agriculture was not something that they were well versed in. They were not well educated on agriculture. Medina had the water resources, had the climate, had the soil basically that suited agriculture. So what they used to do is completely different than what Muhammad ibn Abdullah and Sallallahu and the people in Mecca were familiar with. The people of Mecca, they used trade as the way to basically, let's say, enrich the economy because their land was not fertile enough for using agriculture as their means of income. But the people of Medina, they were well versed with what agriculture is. To make the story short, when the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, he saw them banging and hitting the palm trees. Now, the Prophet ﷺ had forbid them, said, don't hit the palm trees. You know, that's why are you hitting the palm trees? But then what happened was the following year, the palm trees didn't pollinate. Then they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, you ordered us not to hit the palm trees and we didn't get a good production. That's when they explained it to him that with our experience, when we would hit these palm trees, that would basically result in the different pollen to the male pollen, the female pollen. Basically, that's where we're getting the male and the female palm trees basically pollinate and produce better dates and even more dates. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, you know best at what suits your dunya. Okay, so when you look at the sunnah, if we're talking about sunnah to mean the Prophet ﷺ's practice, personal preference, then that's not necessarily a religious direction for us. So was the Prophet ﷺ using a spoon? He wasn't using a spoon. Why wasn't he using a spoon? Maybe it wasn't available. If you look at the utensils that they had were really simple, to the point that they would, they would literally just cook things that are not fluid, because they didn't have the utensils to hold fluids. So it would usually be a chunk. And how would they present that? They would just basically just literally spill it on the floor, or have like a ma'idah, or basically like a sheet or something, and they would basically spill it on the floor or on that sheet, and then they would just dig in, basically. The Persians, on the other hand, they were more advanced in what they had invented in utensils. So they had bowls, they had different utensils as spoons, spatulas, all these different things, which the Arab, being primitive, did not actually have, because they didn't have the resources, not the trays, not the science, and they were very primitive, so they didn't really have these tools to use. They didn't have these tools to use because they didn't even have the idea. Versus the Persians, well, they had bowls. They had all these more, let's say, complex and more advanced utensils that it isn't until later the Arab learned later how to use these tools, how to make coins, how to use pens, how to use different ways of making even foods. Cheese, for example, they didn't know what cheese was until they basically had conquered Persia, and that's when they learned about cheese. They didn't know what cheese was. Okay? They, the foods that they were using were very primitive. The meals were very primitive. The sweets, all of it was very primitive, because the resources that they had were very very limited anyways. But you look at India, for example, at the time, India and China at the time were considered the most advanced worlds, because the resources that their earth produced were definitely rich. So they would get the spices. They didn't have the spices, that is the Arab, and they didn't have spices. Their foods were really stale and bland. Very bland. But you go to India, just the biryani right there. Just think of the number of different spices, and you got some spices that are crushed and some spices that are actually put as a whole, and they've got all these different ways. And you're like, man, those are the experts of spices. And if you don't put a lot of spices, man, your food is stale. For an Indian to eat Arabi food, they're like, oh man, I could throw up from that. This is real. Because the Arab, they don't have these resources. Think of even the time back. They didn't have these resources, so they didn't use them. They weren't there. So same thing when we talk about spoons, bowls, and probably a pressure cooker or whatever it is, that doesn't make it a sunnah to mean that you would be rewarded if you were to eat with your hand and not a spoon. You can eat a spoon. Okay. No. Please do not eat your spoon. You can eat with a spoon. You can eat with a spoon, okay, and still basically get rewarded for doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Basically, that does not make you getting less rewards. At the same time, if your intention was, well, I want to do it and replicate the simple life that the Prophet ﷺ was doing, and actually eat with my hand exactly the way that the primitive lifestyle the Arab were doing it in, well, good for you. That's okay too. You can do it this way or that way. Okay, let's continue right there. What time is it? 11:35. We've got the sister is asking a question. She said, how many nights does tafsir take place? 6 days a week. That's a lot, right? 6 days a week, except well, my Sunday, that makes your Saturday, at least most of you, because we have people from all over the world. So yes, 6 days a week we do tafsir. اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك لا إله إلا هو وأعرض عن المشركين. So now we're going to the following ayah. What is اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك? The word اتبع, the root is تبع. تبع means to follow the footsteps of something. ما أوحي إليك, what was revealed unto you from your Lord. Notice that it didn't say from اتبع ما أوحي إليك من الله. No, من ربك. We believe that Allah is a Rabb anyways, so what's the difference? The difference is that when you say the word Rabb, it's giving a relationship to let the Prophet ﷺ know that al-wahy itself, that Islam itself, the revelation itself, sorry, the plates are above. I don't know what they're doing, man. Does Malaysia actually have an army, like an army to face enemies? I don't really know. Man, what is that, an F-16 on the top of my head? I think that's... I remember hearing Israel firing using the Apache. I remember I was near Ramallah when Israel fired with the Apache basically missiles, and killed Abu Ali Mustafa, who was the head of Al-Jabhah Sha'biyya. He was actually praying at the time. Ironically, Abu Ali Mustafa, subhanAllah, sometimes I don't understand, the Palestinian ignorance. I know it's completely off topic, but sometimes it's really weird that some Muslims are ignorant about Islam. Jabhah Sha'biyya is supposed to be a communist party. But then this person was actually praying and doesn't recognize that contradicts Islam. Anyhow, we're really off topic. Okay, so when you say اتبع ما أوحي إليك من ربك, that's basically to give the inference that Sharia itself and all the different details of al-wahy, that they're actually to contain affection, to contain mercy, to contain what brings you benefit. Why and how did you get that? The word Rabb basically means the Lord that takes care of you. So what was revealed unto you was revealed from a Lord that has the care for you, that has the interests that suit you as to bring you the benefit, that basically is guiding you through the channels, through ayat, through basically all the process of how you put in the details of al-ayat, and what was revealed was in order to channel you towards your benefit, towards the purpose that preceded your existence, towards your good, because it is coming from your Lord Almighty. And that's basically Al-Quran. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling him, I know what they're going to say. We know their objection. We know very well their objection and what they were claiming, but you, on the other hand, just follow the words, the wahy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to you from your Lord Almighty, and therefore all these distractions, don't let them distract you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you, on the other hand, اشتغل بعبادة الله. You get yourself busy with worshiping the Lord Almighty and doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to do, and don't let whether the different spews that they would be putting out there, or maybe the words, and maybe the distractions, or maybe the accusations, or maybe all these different satires against you, all of that, don't let that distract you from your goal. Your goal is Jannah. Don't get distracted away. La ilaha illahu. There's no God but the Lord Almighty. وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. No God worthy of worship but Allah Almighty. Now you, أَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Leave al-mushrikeen. But أَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, he said, mansukh. Abrogated. Why would you say it was abrogated? He said it was abrogated by ayah as-sayf. What is ayah as-sayf? There's an ayah called ayah as-sayf. Yes, that's فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَّةً كَمَا يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ كَافَّةً. That's basically ayah as-sayf in Surah At-Tawbah, ayah number 5. But majority of the scholars, they said it is muhkama. Wait a minute. So what's the difference? Muhkama is the opposite of mansukh. Mansukh means abrogated. Abrogated means that a certain ruling, not fact, but a certain ruling was cancelled out, or at least some details were given. Okay? Muhkama means it's a fact, nothing had changed, and basically it was not abrogated. Let's say, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا. Or should we, you know what? Let's see. We'll just stop at this one. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا, because this one, you see, this one has 5 different matters that we're going to be talking about. Let's see. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِوَكِيلٍ. If the Lord Almighty had willed that they would not associate partners with Him, He would have actually done that. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wait a minute, so shirk is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will? So He accepts that people would commit shirk? No. Let me explain it. There are 2 kinds of will. Okay. There's one. There's one will that is the natural will. Okay? And there's the other one, is the legislating will. Okay, explain it to me. So you've got one of them is basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you in free will. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you free will to choose to go to the masjid or to choose to go shopping. You can choose to do this or that. And that is al-mashi'a al-kawniyya. Let's write it down. Al-mashi'a al-kawniyya. The other one is al-mashi'a al-tashri'iyya, which means what? Al-mashi'a al-tashri'iyya is the legislating will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. He would not accept that people would associate partners with Him. He would not accept that women would go out not wearing hijab. He would not accept that that men would engage in haram looking, or He would not accept that people would do riba. Okay, all those different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not permit kufr, does not permit sin. Okay, He does not will it, but this one, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا, to mean that there was a will that He put within nature. That's al-mashi'a al-kawniyya. In other words, if He had willed that they would not have free will, He would have been capable of doing that if that's what He wanted. Okay? He would have been capable of doing that. But that is not whatsoever to say then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is approving it. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. There's al-mashi'a tashri'iyya to let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will sin, kufr, or any of that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given people the free will to choose, and that's why He's holding them accountable for it. So وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا. We had not made you حَفِيظًا. What is حَفِيظًا? Is that the word حَفِظًا, like a hafiz type of thing? Right. So حَفِظًا, let's write it down. The word حَفِظًا. The word حَفِظًا means to memorize, means to basically preserve. Okay, memorize and preserve. Wait a minute. So what's the relationship between both? If you're memorizing something, you got it in your brain. Yeah, but you're preserving it in your brain. Okay, you're preserving it in your brain. So that's why, this person, حفظ al-Quran, meaning that they had preserved the Quran in their brain. It's right there, basically kept in their brain. Okay, so that's why they're called hafiz, that he is preserving the Quran in their brain. Okay, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all part of those hafidhin and part of those that would apply the Quran in action. Okay. Hafidh could also mean to preserve. To preserve from what? From contamination, to preserve from harm, to preserve from any well, we could just say in general, okay, from harm. So when you say وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا, what does that mean? That, in other words, you cannot preserve them, O Muhammad ibn Abdullah, from the implication of their free will and what they had chosen, and the consequence would be the torments of the Lord Almighty, the punishments. In other words, at the end, you're not going to be capable to determine the implication of their choices. You're not going to be capable, you're not going to be capable of preserving them or even channeling them towards faith. You could give them direction, but if they choose not to embrace it, well, that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given them the choice to choose to believe or not to believe. وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا. And you're not going to be capable of protecting them from the consequence of what choices they had made. وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِوَكِيلٍ. And at the end, even though I want to look at this one. It's quite interesting. Okay, we're going to look at this one. Remember before when we looked at just a few minutes ago, okay, when we talked about ما أوحي إليك من ربك, and we said ما أوحي إليك من ربك, and that was actually telling us that what is in al-Wahy, in al-Quran, in al-Sunnah, was to bring about benefit, was to bring about support, was to give us all of that. Right. So that's the same thing when you look at the ayah, وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا, because he wanted to maximize their happiness, their pleasure, their interest, their benefit, etc. But of course, you can't force somebody. I can direct you to pray. I can direct you to wear hijab. I can direct you to memorize. I can direct you to eat halal. I can direct you to do all these things. But if you choose not to do so, then therefore the inference is, I would want to support you because I love you. You're, my relative, whatever it is, my mother, whoever your relative that you're trying to guide, for example, but then they're not accepting it. وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا. That's to tell you, well, there's nothing that you would be capable of doing if they don't themselves choose to embrace what was supposed to be giving them the preservation, the security, the stability, and all of these different things that Sharia was there to bring. So therefore, you're not hafidah. They're left to their own responsibility to ensure their own security, their own provision, their own stability, their own interests. So at the end, the inference is Sharia was there to give them all those good, maximizing security, maximizing justice, maximizing stability, all of that. But if they choose otherwise, well, وَمَا جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَفِيظًا. You're not going to be capable of preserving them. You're not going to be capable of giving them the stability or whatever they're seeking to maximize basically their interests. وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِوَكِيلٍ. And you're not going to be basically capable of taking care of their different matters, not in this life and not the hereafter. At the end, you're not going to be capable of giving them the guardianship, because you only have one duty, which is to deliver the message. Right? This is it. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. So I hope I answered the questions. MashaAllah, we had really important questions. Inshallah, tomorrow there are actually some details here. Man, I wish I can even go farther right now. I mean, I'm getting those butterflies to tell me keep on going, but no, we got to give you ladies some time to rest. ولا تسبوا الذين يدعون من دون الله فيسبوا الله عدوا بغير علم. Lots of details. In fact, al-Qurtubi said that there are 5 different matters to talk about just on this ayah. In fact, there's a legal maxim. It's called sadd al-dhara'i. It's called sadd al-dhara'i. We'll talk about this one, inshallah, tomorrow, because it's this ayah that was actually the key ayah to give that let's call it the deriving, to help the scholars of fiqh basically derive the ruling and the legal maxim, sadd al-dhara'i. What is sadd al-dhara'i? To basically close the means that lead to evil. But that's a very, very simplistic and a very shallow translation. So, inshallah, we'll go in details about our relationship. This one is actually the crux of hikmah, the crux of wisdom. So stay tuned for tomorrow. If you don't actually know this ayah and you don't have sadd al-dhara'i in place, then there's no way that this person can basically give whether social advice or whether we're speaking about a different, let's call it, whether it's advising or decision making or whatever. So that ayah is key. But how far do we do sadd al-dhara'i? I mean, can I say, yeah, just so that people would not take that as an excuse, we're going to close this means and that means and that means, to make sure that Muslims are not replicating the kuffar. How far can we go? How far and how strict can we go? So we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. So things like, for example, remind me to talk about this one. Things like, let's say, a wedding ring. In some cultures they would wear a wedding ring, other cultures they don't. And then a wedding ring basically dates back to the Romans, and was said that this is to give a sign that she's owned by that man or whatever. Does that mean wearing a wedding ring is haram? And really? What does that mean? And we'll speak about that inshallah tomorrow. So this is it for now. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. And this, let me just close the recording. I know we talked